There's something surprising about people with extremely high IQs. They almost never act the way you would expect. Most people picture someone with a brilliant mind as confident, speaking up to solve every problem, and making sure everyone notices how smart they are. But psychology research tells a very different story. Many of the behaviors most often seen in people with extremely high IQs look nothing like what we usually think of as intelligence. In fact, some of them seem like the exact opposite. After decades of studying brilliant minds, cognitive psychologists have discovered that having a very high IQ does much more than make someone smarter. It completely changes the way they process the world, and that difference shows up in very specific and easy to recognize ways. Before we continue, if you enjoy this kind of content, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps more people discover videos about psychology and human behavior. Now, let's look at 11 psychological traits that researchers keep finding in people with very high IQs. The first trait is a strong preference for being alone. Highly intelligent people often spend a lot of time by themselves, not because they dislike other people, but because their minds are always processing information. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for complex thinking, planning, and deep reflection, works best in quiet places with very few distractions. For a brain like that, being alone is not isolation, it's fuel. A study from the London School of Economics found something that may sound surprising. People with very high IQs reported being less satisfied with life when they socialized, often compared to people with average intelligence. In other words, their brains do not recharge the same way most people's do. They recharge in silence, not because they are cold or unfriendly, but because their minds need that quiet to work at their best. The second trait is that their minds almost never fully shut off. People with very high IQs often say their thoughts never stop, not when they are resting, not at night, and not even during activities that most people find relaxing. There is always something running in the background, working on a problem or building a new idea. Psychologist Kazimierz Dabrowski studied this pattern in gifted people and described it in his theory of overexcitabilities. He identified what he called psychomotor overexcitability, an intense inner energy that shows up mentally rather than physically. Neuroscience research on intelligence and creativity also suggests that higher intelligence is linked to stronger connections between distant parts of the brain, not just faster processing in individual areas. In other words, these brains do not simply think faster. They connect ideas across a much larger network all the time, and that constant activity is exactly what makes it so hard for them to truly rest. The third trait may be the most surprising once you see the research. Many people assume that high intelligence comes with emotional coldness. They picture a highly intelligent person as someone who is completely controlled by logic and trapped inside their own mind. But the research tells a very different story. People with very high IQs tend to feel emotions more deeply, not less. Dabrowski described this as emotional overexcitability, a heightened sensitivity to emotional experiences that makes these people especially responsive to beauty, music, injustice, and the suffering of others. A study published in the journal Intelligence found that higher IQ scores are linked to much stronger emotional responses, especially when it comes to art, moral questions, and human behavior. This trait often goes unnoticed because highly intelligent people are also very good at controlling and hiding what they feel. The fourth trait is being comfortable saying, "I don't know." This is known as intellectual humility, and it surprises many people because we often assume that higher intelligence leads to greater confidence. Research shows the opposite. People with very high IQs are much more willing to admit the limits of what they know. And they do it sincerely, not as a social performance. This connects directly to the Dunning-Kruger effect, the well-known finding that people with less knowledge in a subject often become more confident simply because they do not understand how complex that subject really is. Highly intelligent people see that complexity clearly. They have explored so many ideas and discovered so many exceptions that they understand how much is still uncertain. So when someone with a high IQ says, "I don't know," they are not being unsure, they are being accurate. Psychology has found that this simple phrase is one of the strongest signs of real intelligence. The fifth trait is something these people rarely talk about, yet research finds it almost everywhere. They often struggle to find people they can truly connect with on an intellectual level. It is not because they think they are better than everyone else. It is because conversations that never go very deep leave them feeling mentally unstimulated. Psychologist Lita Hollingworth spent decades studying gifted adults and called this the problem of limited stimulation. It is the experience of a mind that cannot find enough challenge or depth in its everyday environment. What she observed was not arrogance. It was a quiet desire for meaningful conversations with someone who could follow an idea all the way through without stopping too soon. That is why highly intelligent people can sometimes seem distant. It is not because they lack social skills. They have simply learned that most conversations are not built to handle the level of depth they need. So they hold back, simplify what they say, and much of who they really are never gets a chance to appear. The sixth trait is cognitive flexibility. Highly intelligent people tend to treat their beliefs as working ideas instead of permanent parts of their identity. When new information proves them wrong, they adjust their thinking without resistance. Changing their minds does not feel like losing part of themselves. It feels like becoming more accurate. In psychology, this is called cognitive flexibility, and it is one of the strongest signs of advanced problem-solving ability. From the outside, this can look like inconsistency. Someone who changes their opinion may seem unreliable, but the opposite is usually true. They are simply updating their understanding in an honest and continuous way. The seventh trait is preferring to observe before speaking. In conversations and group settings, highly intelligent people usually watch and listen before sharing their thoughts. They pay attention not only to what people say, but also to what they leave unsaid. They notice patterns in social interactions, who gives others the chance to speak, where the real tension exists, and what the conversation is truly about beneath the surface. Research on social intelligence consistently shows that people with higher IQs are more accurate at reading social and emotional signals. At the same time, they often need more time to process everything they notice before they respond. They are not slow thinkers. They are simply gathering more information first. Because of this, they are often mistaken for people who have little to contribute, when in reality they usually have the clearest understanding of what is happening. The eighth trait is confusing even for the people who experience it. They often procrastinate on the work that matters most to them. The projects with the greatest personal meaning and the highest potential are often the hardest to begin, while small and low-risk tasks are completed without much effort. Researchers who study people with exceptional cognitive ability found that this pattern is not laziness. It comes from an awareness of complexity. Before they even begin an important project, their minds already understand everything it would take to do it exceptionally well. They can already see every possible flaw and every way the final result might fall short of the standard they have in mind. Psychologist Carol Dweck found that this pattern is especially common among gifted people. It is not exactly a fear of failure. It is the gap between the perfect vision in their minds and the reality they know they may not be able to achieve. Their procrastination does not come from a lack of interest. It comes from caring too much. The ninth trait is that they get bored much faster than almost everyone around them. Highly intelligent people usually adapt to familiar situations very quickly. Because of that, they need new experiences and new challenges to stay interested. What kept them engaged yesterday may no longer be enough today. Neuroscience research has linked higher cognitive ability to greater baseline dopamine activity in the prefrontal cortex. This is the part of the brain that responds to new information and intellectual challenges. When those challenges disappear, that activity drops noticeably. The restlessness they feel is not just a mood. It is a physical response to not getting enough mental stimulation. That is why many highly intelligent people pursue several interests at once, change careers more than once, or feel strangely dissatisfied in situations that seem perfectly comfortable to everyone else. The 10th trait is constant self-doubt, and this is closely connected to intelligence, not the opposite of it. People with very high IQs often experience a level of inner uncertainty that surprises those around them. It is not fake humility. It is a real and ongoing question about whether their own thinking is as reliable as other people believe it is. This happens not because they are weak, but because they understand complexity too well to feel completely certain about anything. Once again, this connects to the Dunning-Kruger effect, but from the opposite side. The deeper your knowledge of a subject becomes, the more clearly you see how much is still unknown. The more you learn, the more aware you become of everything you still have to learn. Intelligence does not create certainty. It creates a clearer picture of how much there is left to discover. Psychologist Albert Ellis observed that highly intelligent people often held themselves to standards they would never expect from anyone else. They saw any gap between their performance and their potential as proof that they were somehow falling short. The 11th and final trait brings all the others together. It is a quiet feeling of never fully fitting in. Highly intelligent people often report a subtle but lasting feeling that they do not completely belong in their social groups, their careers, or sometimes even the world around them. This is not dramatic loneliness or poor social skills. It is the natural result of experiencing the world with a different level of detail than most people. When your brain processes more information, connects more ideas, feels emotions more deeply, and needs more depth than your surroundings usually provide, a sense of being slightly out of sync becomes almost unavoidable. It is not because something is wrong. It is because your mind works differently. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, whose decades of research on creativity and exceptional minds remain highly respected in cognitive psychology, found that people with the highest intellectual abilities almost always describe their inner lives as the most complex, the hardest to explain, and the hardest to share. Not because they suffered more than everyone else, but because they experienced life in a level of detail that the people around them simply did not notice. What is most interesting about these 11 traits is how often they are misunderstood. A person who needs time alone is called antisocial. Someone whose mind never stops is seen as anxious. Someone who feels deeply is labeled overly sensitive. Someone who questions themselves is seen as insecure. And someone who never seems to fit in is often called difficult. But what looks like a collection of small personal struggles is actually something much more specific. It is the result of a mind built to process more, connect more, and go farther than most of the environments it moves through every day. In the end, having an extremely high IQ is not just about knowing more or thinking faster. It is about experiencing the full complexity of the world with very little distance between yourself and reality. More than any test score or number, that is what makes intelligence both incredibly powerful and incredibly demanding. If this video described you or someone you know, leave a comment and tell me which trait felt the most familiar. I read every comment. And if this video gave words to something you have quietly carried for a long time, share it with someone who needs to hear it too. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss our next videos about psychology and the fascinating mysteries of the human mind. See you in the next video.